Australia's east coast is currently experiencing an energy crisis. In this video series, I'm explaining what the heck is going on, breaking down the facts as to how we got here, and sharing how this may impact you. In part 1 of this series, I explained how the national electricity market works, and shared 2 features of the market that help to piece together what's going on. If you're new to this series, I'd recommend checking out part 1 before continuing. For many, it feels like we've gone from business as usual to a full-blown energy crisis overnight. However, the dominoes leading towards this crisis have been stacking for months. In this video, I'm going to break down what those dominoes look like and explain what happened when they finally toppled. Over the last few months, the wholesale electricity price has been rising at an alarming rate. Let's take a look at why. Domino number 1, availability. Starting with the fire at the Callide Power Station in Queensland last year, coal-fired power stations have been experiencing unplanned technical issues far more frequently than normal, a symptom of an ageing fleet of generation. In total, around about 1/3 of Australia's coal-fired generation capacity was missing from the network leading up to this event, and our 4 largest coal-fired power stations have been dealing with technical issues. While that didn't actually leave us with a shortage of power, it did mean that the remaining generators were operating with less competition in the market. It also meant that we did need to rely on more expensive power stations more frequently to fill in the gaps of missing capacity. These power stations are typically only reserved for times of peak demand and are not supposed to be used consistently because they are more expensive. Domino number 2, international coal and gas prices. Did you know that Australia typically exports 85% of our coal and 75% of our gas supplies? Right now, because of the war in Ukraine, the demand internationally for fuel has skyrocketed, sending prices through the roof. Because of the high price that they can get for exporting coal and gas overseas, suppliers have been charging significantly more for domestic use. As a result of this, our coal and gas-fired power stations on the east coast have had no choice but to purchase their fuel at significantly higher prices than normal. Domino number 3, flooding. Extreme weather events earlier this year created issues with the local coal supply chain. Major flooding events have disrupted coal mining operations and interrupted coal transport routes, such as rail lines. In some instances, this has limited the amount of coal that power stations have been able to access. As a result of the availability issue I mentioned before, many power stations are also running at much higher loads than normal to be able to compensate for the ones that weren't available. This whole issue is made much more complex when there's a shortage of coal. Domino number 4, very cold weather. Perhaps the catalyst domino in this crisis, Australia experienced unusually cold temperatures along the east coast over the last few weeks. With everything I've just spoken about, the last thing the industry needed was a sudden surge in demand. When temperatures plummeted along the east coast of Australia, demand for both gas and electricity skyrocketed, catching many by surprise. These dominoes, along with many others, set us up for the perfect storm, pushing power prices higher and higher until finally the power price had been too high for too long. As I explained in my last video, when the power price has been too high for too long, the energy market operator steps in and caps the price at $300 a megawatt hour to essentially stop retailers from going broke. This is called administrative pricing. Now, in normal situations, when a cap like this comes into play, such as during a short-term heat wave, generators would continue to bid their electricity and consumers like us would have no idea that anything had even occurred. Thanks to those stacked dominoes, this situation was far from normal. Rather than a short-term heat wave, the price cap was triggered after months and months of challenging conditions. So the other week, when the administrative pricing cap came into play, generators around the country suddenly started withdrawing their capacity from the market. Essentially what that means is, even though there were power stations sitting there ready to run, they weren't actually offering their supply. This put us at risk of not having enough power to keep the lights on. So why did generators start withdrawing their capacity? It's very easy in situations like this to start a blame game. Until the formal investigation is released and we understand the full series of events of what took place, I won't draw any conclusions. Under the national electricity rules, a generator is allowed to rebid and essentially withdraw its capacity or some of its capacity from the market if it can demonstrate a verifiable and specific reason for doing so. Here are 2 very logical reasons why a generator may have no choice but to withdraw some or all of its capacity from a market in a situation like this. Reason number 1, they cannot afford to run. Given the high prices for coal and gas that I discussed previously, It's very plausible that the $300 megawatt hour price cap was simply not enough for a power station to earn in order to recover its operating and fuel costs. This particularly affects power stations who have less longer-term supply contracts for their fuel and are more exposed to those volatile market prices for coal and gas. We rely on coal and gas-fired generators to meet about 65% of our electricity needs year-round. This means there will have been a lot of power stations in the market impacted by this issue. Coal and gas-fired power stations wouldn't have been the only ones impacted by high prices for their fuel. Interestingly, batteries and pumped hydro generators, whose electricity source is fuel from the grid, would have also been impacted in market conditions like this. For batteries, their fuel is the electricity coming from the grid that they use to recharge, and for pumped hydro, their fuel is actually electricity they use to drive pumps to move water back uphill. In order to access this electricity, pumped hydro and batteries, for the most part, pay the same wholesale price that our retailers pay. This is the same wholesale price that was capped at $300 a megawatt hour. A way that batteries and pumped hydro generators will typically make money in a market is by selling their electricity when the price is high, and then purchasing their electricity to recharge when the price is low. But when the price is capped or fixed at a value like $300 a megawatt hour, they actually can't make any money. They actually lose money because these systems aren't 100% efficient, so they have to purchase more electricity than what they sell. Reason number 2, they run out of fuel. With many of our main generators withdrawing from the market for whatever reason, who's left? In situations like these, we do have a number of power stations that are designed to run for very short periods of time, only when we absolutely need them. These remaining generators, such as batteries, or gas, diesel, and hydroelectric power stations, are not designed to run 24/7, as they have limited supplies of fuel for gas or diesel power stations, limited supplies of water for hydro stations, or limited supplies of stored energy for batteries. Once they run out of fuel, they too need to withdraw from the market until they can refill, refuel, or restock. Now, there is a reason that a generator may withdraw its capacity that's considered not allowable under the national electricity rules. On June 14th, 2 days after generators started withdrawing their capacity, the National Electricity Regulator issued a letter to all generators, reminding them of the national electricity rules and their compliance obligations. Essentially, this letter is a summary of the regulator's suspicions that some generators withdrew their capacity from the market because they preferred to be compensated through the market direction process, rather than the ongoing administrative pricing process. A market direction may occur when we have so little electricity available that the operator has to step in and actually direct or tell the power station to turn on and provide electricity, even if it wasn't bidding in the first place, so long as it technically can provide that power. Interestingly, generators are likely to earn slightly less money if they are compensated with the market direction, so at face value it seems a little odd that they would prefer this. However, the payments for market directions and administrative pricing are handled by 2 different agencies in 2 different ways. First, market directions are automatically processed by the Australian Energy Market Operator. With administrative pricing, the generator must submit a claim to the Australian Energy Market Commission, a different entity. Under administrative pricing, there are also some costs which generators can't claim, such as startup and repair costs, but these are included in market directions. Most importantly, market directions are handled privately, meaning the amount that each specific generator is paid is not disclosed. On the other hand, the administrative pricing process is publicised. Details of a generator's profits, fuel and maintenance costs, for example, may become public through this process. And this is very commercially sensitive information. Withdrawing capacity from the market without reasonable technical or economic cause is against the national electricity rules. As the regulator and the ACCC's investigations continue, I'm sure more information will become available over time as to if this actually did occur. With the situation over that week not improving and generators continuing to withdraw their capacity, on June 15th, the AEMO decided to suspend the market completely, putting a halt to the entire bidding process. While power continued to be provided through the poles and wires to Australia, a suspended market means that the whole way of selecting generators and then paying them for electricity completely changed. The suspended market lasted for about a week, and on June 23rd, the suspension was lifted and operations of the national electricity market returned to as normal. This is the first time in history that the whole national electricity market has been suspended, so this is new territory for everybody. Even with the suspension lifted, wholesale market prices are still far higher than they used to be, and the industry is still piecing together what this whole situation means for the future and the impact on consumers' power bills. As industry bodies prepare their investigations to understand exactly what happened, there is general consensus that this situation was a prime example of what happens when we are over-reliant on a fleet of aging generation and underprepared to respond when it's not available. This is a serious wake-up call, particularly as our market and electricity network becomes more complicated as we continue to decarbonise. The closure of coal-fired power stations is both inevitable and accelerating, putting us at risk of events like these happening again. The industry is heading in the right direction by racing to build renewable generation, energy storage and electricity transmission to support the entire decarbonisation of our sector. However, it is a shame that many of the opportunities to get ahead of this over the last 10 years weren't taken advantage of. The question on everyone's mind is, can we do it quickly enough? And what does this mean for consumers' power bills in the meantime? I hope you've enjoyed this video and have a better understanding as to what led up to the energy crisis and what took place over these last few weeks. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. Thanks for watching Energy Explained.